Are you actually based from somewhere which not an airport lounge?
Yes, I'm usually based in San Francisco, and our office is on a Sand Hill Road.
Ah, beautiful. And the guitar behind you?
This is just a mini guitar. So one of the things I like is country music. So that little figurine is from Nashville.
No kidding. So
It's actually a
it's
little.
actually a mini.
It's actually a
Oh,
little whiskey decanter. You put the whiskey inside and it decants it. I really love my work. And part of it is because I get to interact with a lot of different cultures. So I was born and raised in San Francisco, but growing up, it was a very, very diverse setting. And I always never felt like this was really just this small place was my home. And so as you know, I do a lot of international business and I just love learning about the different cultures, whether it's
mhm.
Israeli, whether it's Japanese or American. And, in America, it's quite large. So there's a lot of different subcultures as well. And then there's, of course, Europe and other parts of Asia. And so that's definitely one of my hobbies is just really understanding different cultures and figuring out how to integrate some of it. Part of my day job is figuring out how to transfer some of that knowledge to all the various different cultures and figuring out how to do business and close deals together. But on a non-business front, I think I really love art. I really love music, listening to music. I think naturally my personality is a little bit more creative. Our field is very, very logical and, work with a lot of engineers. So I think my outlet tends to be things that are a little bit more creative. Okay, so my background's actually in psychology and sociology. So I spent a lot of time looking at social systems. But I started out my career actually doing research in biochemistry. So I was doing research in a lab, and what I realized was that I didn't want to sit in a lab playing with droplets of water all day. The reality is today, a lot of it, thankfully, is now automated. But at that point, I was literally playing with
Oh, you did that.
droplets of water and figuring out what to do with it, sequencing the DNA. But I was always very passionate about making the world a better place. So from there, I actually moved into, I taught first grade very briefly for about 2 years. It was really fun. And then I'm sort of a lifelong learner. So after I learn something, I kind of get bored and sort of move on to the next thing. So teaching was really great. First year,
Mhm.
second year, a little bit less interesting. Moved on to the next thing. I did economic and workforce development. So I was worked as a caseworker, helping people to find jobs, after they got laid off or they got out of jail or whatever it is, this transitional period. And what I learned was that a lot of these people would end up cycling in the society, which made me really sad. I went to talk to the CEO and I said, hey, I really want to make a big impact. And she actually told me to leave. And that's when I actually stumbled upon tech and ventures. I didn't join right away, but I started to read a lot of books and learn about like what it was like, or what do people do in tech. And what I found is this concept of scalability. You can build something and you can impact a lot of people. So when I was a caseworker, I think I had about 65 or so on my caseload where I was helping and meeting pretty regularly. The goal is to get them off my caseload. But at some point, you can only do so many of them, right? But then when it came to tech, when I learned about this concept, I just absolutely fell in love with it. I fell in love with technology. I fell in love with the people who worked in it because they were very, very passionate about building the technology, solving a problem, and moving on. So what I would do is you could join a hackathon, try to build something and try to solve a problem in a weekend versus I think in some sectors you just spend tons of time just talking and not actually solving problems. So I tend to be a little bit more hands-on. So from there, I ended up actually helping to build out a couple of incubator and accelerator programs. I joined Alchemist Accelerator. It was actually before it turned into an accelerator. It's one of the top enterprise accelerators. And that's where I was very lucky to meet a lot of really great advisors and mentors. They happened to be, it was actually a technical program. And they had mentors that were top Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. And so I was part of the person who built out the mentoring program and, was managing a lot of the advisors and mentors. And through that program, I was very lucky to work with a lot of different companies. So I did a lot of actually different operational roles, whether it's business development, research, or sales, whatever it is. I went in to go in and support that. I then got picked up by this group called European Innovation Academy to help build out their entrepreneurship training program. It started in Estonia, but then expanded to France, Portugal, Hong Kong, and China, just all these different parts of the world. And so I'm still an advisor for it, and I would often go back to judge the finals. And then I built out a couple of other programs. Eventually got picked up by this organization called Singtel Group. It's a very large Singaporean telco, but they also own businesses throughout that region as well as Australia. I was always based in Silicon Valley, and I had two primary functions. One is to do investments and then to do tech scouting. So I worked across the executive teams of all these groups to look for new technologies to partner and go to market into Asia. So, I was working with portfolio companies that were doing maybe 10 million in revenue, trying to grow to 100. But with my parent company, I was working with them to do things that are like 100 million in revenue to something a lot bigger, right? So the goals were different, but I really love working in both like the early stage as well as the large corporates. I was with them for about 5 years, and then I joined MS&AD about 4 years ago. And doing a very similar role. I'm doing early stage investments and then also looking for new technologies to partner with our parent company. And our parent company has businesses in about 50 different countries around the world.
Can you describe the venture? What's the focus? Is it only one LP? Which fund are you running out of?
Absolutely. So MS&AD Group is a large Japanese conglomerate. It stands for Mitsui Sumitomo and Aiwa Nisei Dowa. It's a holdings company mainly focused on insurance. And I'm one of the partners at MS&AD Ventures. We have 300 million under management. We typically invest early stage, so pre-seed to Series A, and then we make a little bit of exceptions for some later stage investments. But we have both financial and strategic goals. And then there's two primary functions of the team. One is to do early stage investments, and then the other one is to do partnerships. So we have a team of about 10 people who are going out there to just scout for new technologies to partner with our parent company, regardless of whether we invest or not. We are deploying out of our fourth fund, and we do about maybe 15 investments a year, 15 to 20 investments a year.
Check sizes? I know you said seed.
So we typically like to follow with check sizes of 1 to 3 million. So we, are very easy to work with. So we'll co-invest with, top investors in different countries and different regions. The only place we don't invest in is actually Japan, because in Japan we have a separate entity that they invest out of. So we kind of stay out of their way.
Yeah, of course. I worked as an external innovation advisor to Sumitomo Americas. I had the pleasure of working on 3 different projects, 2 in Latam, here, 1 in Chicago. And it's fascinating, the breadth and amount of industries. One here, the Chicago is still in South America, in Buenos Aires and Sao Paulo, completely different on one was feed, another one was looking at the pharmaceutical. And the amount of outreach, when you think about, yes, there is a company or a holding company. No, this is a conglomerate that starts from chemistry to feed to and of course there is the insurance and so many things. And it's sometimes amazing in terms of the strategy and the thought of looking forward and planning, not just 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even 50 years to the future, trying to understand what will be next, and how are you ready to do that? Then you bring someone and talk, hey, let's do innovation. Tell me about your startup mentality of like, we're going to do a hackathon, 24 hours, and let's see what happens. Go like, doesn't really work. Add to that the Japanese culture, and then there is a very interesting combination. Sometimes it's a clash, but everyone is polite, so it works very lovely.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that's like part of the fun, right? Like if this was a very easy, simple job, I think I would just be really bored and find something else to do. But I think navigating the complexities of the several worlds together, it's like figuring out how to get like Israeli culture versus Japanese culture. It's like complete opposite. You're like, please work together. And then the communication mishaps and like the types of headaches that we get from like the mishaps, it's like annoying. You're like, I don't believe you can't have basic communication. But on the flip side, like the art of navigating that is actually, to me, part of the fun, because you're like, okay, let's figure out how to get this to work. Let's figure out how to get this to work, right? And it does take some patience. And I think some people like don't enjoy that, but I think there's definitely a part of me that enjoys sort of navigating that, because it is a little bit difficult, right? Because you are now putting those two worlds together and creating something that would not exist. If you just said, hey, look, we naturally won't work together, let's not be together, right? But putting that together, figuring out how to get them to bond and actually doing real business and creating value for this world, that's something I think quite magical.
So you mentioned Israel. Well, being an Israeli who's been living in the US for the past 14 years, do Sumitomo has a presence in Israel?
So our parent company, Mitsui MS&AD, MS actually has some labs, and we have several investments in Israel. And so, I think what we really love about Israel is that they are building technology for the world, right? And so, like, if you take a US company trying to go to Japan, it takes a lot longer. I think when we go and speak to Israeli companies, they are a lot more flexible. So they are much more willing to go to, for instance, Japan a little bit sooner. So we do have some, they're not part of my team directly, but indirectly, we do have a separate team called GDH that sits in Israel.
Yeah, most likely in Sosa or one of the other locations.
They do. Yeah.
Oh, they do. Okay, that was a good guess. Yeah. Let's talk InsurTech.
Okay.
So what's your involved? How long have you been in the InsurTech space?
I'm pretty new to the insurance. I have a funny story, but when I was younger, I also tried selling Aflac for like 3 months, and I absolutely failed. Like I was selling Aflac to the SFPD and San Francisco Police Department, and then the fire department. And so all I would do is go in, service their claims and stuff. But in insurance, you always have to have this conversation about this is what can go wrong, right? And me, as someone who's a bit of an optimist, as a young person, it was a very difficult conversation. Now that I'm a little bit older, I think with insurance, so I joined about 3.5, 4 years ago when I joined MS&AD. It's a little bit of a learning curve, so I had to understand, all the parts of it, and there's so much more that I still need to learn. But what I fundamentally see is insurance can be a way to actually help protect families, help protect society, right? That's what it was originally set up to do. It actually, with that protection, it allows you to take higher risk and push boundaries, right? And so when I moved in, I was like, oh, this will be kind of an interesting space to help transform. What I didn't realize was how antiquated and behind in technology the industry was. So when I joined like 3.5 years ago, we were talking about, looking for solutions and, putting them in a cloud and all that stuff. And like a lot of that wasn't actually happening yet. And the other thing that was that I had to learn was like there was no engineers in-house, everything, most of it was outsourced. So it was a little bit of a learning curve of like, well, how do we find technology? How do we get it to integrate? Now today, what you're seeing is like it's being a little bit more mainstream to talk about, hey, let's move into cloud. Let's actually get things that's API integrated. And it's going to take a little bit of time. But I think this is where the opportunities are. We're seeing the InsurTechs are actually moving a lot faster than the incumbents, but the incumbents are huge, right? So those businesses aren't going to go away right away. But I think that's also where like the potential opportunity is.
What do you think about the current trends? What should we look at? And how did the InsurTech change over the past few years? Actually, we can break it down to a few. What do you think about how the InsurTech changed over the past 4 years?
So I think, depending on what perspective you're looking at, right? I think as an InsurTech, especially if you're a VC-backed InsurTech, you have to make something work. You have to actually build a viable business today, right? A couple of years ago, it was raising like from GWP as if it was revenue, which is like not accurate. It was actually one of the weird things that when I started, I was like, that the math doesn't really make sense. But now everyone came to the same conclusion, and then but this is actually a really great opportunity for the InsurTechs to grow up. The reality is a lot of them is going to die. But this isn't just for insurance. This happens in every industry, every hype cycle, right? The other thing is when I first joined, there was not a lot of strong technical talent. There was some, right? Because you have a bunch of there's little insurance mafia coming out of Israel, but it was not easy to find like technical talent and AI engineers and all that stuff. They typically want to work with other strong AI engineers, and they're working for the tech companies. But because of the economic downturn and some of the layoffs, some of that fresh talent has loosened up, and so they can move into the startups as well as the InsurTech sector. InsurTech sector is now also maturing a little bit. So then you actually have tools and interesting problems to solve. Because before, when you can hire a data scientist, but if you can't have access to the data, what is the data scientist going to do? Most of the time, they're cleaning up the data so that it's in a format so that it can be used by the data scientist, right? He's like, hey, man, that's not the job I signed up for. I signed up to actually do data analysis, right? So we're seeing like the industry overall mature. I think for the large incumbents, it also depends on what your job is, right? I think as the executive team, like they're focused on a lot of the key trends and then figuring like how to integrate. What I find with large corporates, depending on which team you're working on, it's very easy to get stuck, right? If you take the budget that you give to a InsurTech, like $2 million or a $2 million budget to a corporate to do POCs, and think about the outcome. Right. And usually what happens is the InsurTechs tend to move a little bit faster. Why? Because they're going to die. If they don't hit their KPIs and metrics, they're literally just going to die. On the corporate side, it's easier to just push it to the next quarter, push it to the next quarter. And they tend to be a little bit more risk adverse, which is understandable. Why? Because they're managing millions and millions of policies, and they can get in trouble with the regulators versus in the InsurTech, they're so small and they're sort of gentle guidelines, right? And we're not saying, hey, go break the rules. It's just like the way the teams are set up are very, very different. The risk profiles for someone to leave a high-paying job to go and build a startup, right? That person is going to be very, very different who is optimizing for a nice, stable career. Both options are totally fine, right? But it's just like, what are these people doing? And then what are the potential outcomes? I think for the corporates, they can also make very big changes that can kill startups, right? Their job is also to hold on to the market, right? And then obviously there's also lots and lots of room for collaboration.
Are you investing in risk or only in technology? So MGAs or only SaaS providers?
So we actually typically don't invest in enablers. And what we do is, so we do have a couple MGAs and we have a small number of enablers. But we basically, as VCs, my day job is to also return capital, right? So we're looking for companies that can be really, really big. And so the best way is actually to keep quite an open mind. On the flip side, like we also care about like the strategic angle. What value does this actually bring to our parent company, right? And so we're meeting with a bunch of the enablement technology and making introductions to our parent company, but we don't necessarily need to invest in them, because we don't want to say, hey, we invest this one, you have to use it, right? We want, because our parent company owns businesses all over the world, they should be able to use any technology that they believe. What we really do like is unique new business models that can grow very big, right? That's sort of the typical job of a VC. And so we really optimize for those types of companies.
What is your approach for partnerships? Who should startup work with? How does it work without causing small, explosions? That the only person who is the only company is going to be heard from is the startup.
Yeah, so this is not just Japan, but I've been working on partnerships with large corporates for quite a long time, and I think there's something that is really important is actually understanding the cultural differences and the nuances of the different countries and companies. So of course I'm speaking on behalf of ventures, but if you take a look at the Japanese culture and what their value systems are, right? Some of the inefficiencies, what maybe as an American looks like inefficiency, is very, very core to their culture, right? Because they really, really care about something that is done perfectly, that's done well, that's like really takes care of like the customer, right? And so if you give them something that is just, oh, we're going to cut costs and then it's going to make it a lot easier, but you're taking away something so important to them, maybe they don't want to take that. Right. So I think in terms of like partnerships, and this is across the board with all startups, I always explain to them, make sure you raise enough funding to be able to handle the type of partnerships. So we love investing in founders who have experience working internationally. Why? Because they know how extremely difficult it is to sell into a couple of different regions, right? For Southeast Asia, Singapore and Australia tends to be a little bit easier because they speak English. But other Southeast Asian countries, sometimes a little bit more difficult. The technology is very different. The language is very different. Does it make sense to move the technology over when there's a certain amount of money that they can afford, right? It is what it is, right? It's basic math. And then something like Japan takes lots and lots of localization. What makes sense outside might not make sense in Japan. Same thing for parts of Europe and Middle East, right? Requires lots of localization. And so, when I'm talking to any founder, I'd say, hey, are you actually ready to work with an MS&AD? Because for large corporates, they have all the time. They can just say, okay, looks interesting. They can meet with you for 6 months and then push you off for until next year. We try really hard on our team to set very clear expectations on the founder on both sides, right? And then for the startups, right, you can die because you only have 12 to 18 months of runway. What you need to do is close a deal to drive revenue, right? And so you can have all these meetings with these, tier one amazing corporates and close 0 deals, and then your company dies.
Well, it's a downturn. It's a sort of a recession. The jury is still out if it's a recession or not, but the bottom line is that valuation are down. We see less and less deals. Only in the InsurTech, we've seen 50% compared to year. That is less 50% in terms of volume. What is your advice to startups who are trying to raise money?
Specifically InsurTechs, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So my advice to we're still very active. We closed we're closing 2-3 deals as we speak. We've closed about 5 deals in the last couple of months. So we're actually very, very active. But we haven't really done anything. I think there's maybe one that we're considering that's actually a InsurTech. And what they do is just very unique, right? So unless you're doing something extremely unique and there's some special talent on the team that we can't really find anywhere else, in today's landscape, it is extremely difficult for an InsurTech, especially an MGA, to raise. Because what I found is like MGAs and how insurance work in general is a little bit opposite than venture capital. What insurance likes to do is they like to go in, figure out what's safe, and then grow very safe and steadily, right? So even if you grow really fast, it's actually very negative for an insurance company. And then you take a venture backable company, the VCs, what they want. We want grow fast, high margins, right? And those are the things that we really want. So there's a little bit of a conflict. And so the companies that we've actually been investing in actually does have an insurance component to it. They just happen to do a bunch of other stuff. They're also doing software. They're also doing the insurance piece and maybe something else, right? And then when you bundle that together, it ends up being a very healthy venture backable company. When it comes to the InsurTechs today, like if you were very narrowly focused on, maybe just an MGA, right? And maybe you've actually even hit the metrics that you've done, that you promised in 2021. Unfortunately, the bar has shifted, right? And the whole industry has shifted, and and those companies are not getting funded. I think some of them were priced high, especially compared to today's market. So there's potential to do a reprice. But the other thing I had recommended is potentially just like get acqui-hired or do an M&A if you can, figure out how much you can sell it for, and then go build another company. I think especially really good entrepreneurs, they tend to build several companies. It's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with it. You've exited and then figure it out and to build something new. Otherwise, you're stuck with trying to do something that's in sort of some level like a legacy and then trying to figure out how to grow it. If you take a look at some of the more mature InsurTechs, a lot of them are embedding and trying to figure out how to drive revenue in different places. Those are really good tactics, but they're also quite well funded, right? Just because some of the valuations have dropped dramatically, they also have capital to actually go and figure out like how to grow into their valuation. But some of the earlier ones, especially the ones that are coming up for like a Series A or a post-seed, right? If your internals are not willing to support it, I think it's really difficult to get external funding.
So for my own benefit, when should they reach out to me, an investment banker?
Well, if you're you should be like talking to investment bankers if you have like 1 year of runway, right? Otherwise, you don't really have much leverage. If you only have 3 to 6 months left, then you kind of are losing control over your company. Then you have to figure out, well, how do you get more revenue and see if you can get to cash flow positive, right? I think at one point we're telling everyone, well, like if you can't raise, get to cash flow positive, cut staff, cut burn as far as possible, figure out how to serve the customers. And that's just the reality, of what it is. Even the investment bankers and the buyers are also just, they do understand the landscape, right? And so they're trying to figure out like, oh, where the bottom is and, who's willing to sell. And I think it's going to be a difficult time for a lot of like InsurTechs. But like I said, I think this is a very good time for the whole industry to level up and just bring the whole industry to the next level.
Insurance in total, it doesn't really grow naturally, right? It goes that the nature is actually to buy someone else's book of business. This is what I define as the natural way that most of the insurance companies grow. It's very hard to go into a different region or to a different, because we have so much riding on brand recognition, building the trust. Everything is such a long-term game that just to go like, oh, we love this type of risk and we would like to go into 3 new states. Sometimes it's much easier to buy local familiar brands or a book from another familiar brand and to grow that way. And if we apply that to the InsurTechs, if they are MJs or just technology, that can be the way. And we see more and more startups, pure technology startups, that, as you just said, they are out and quietly or less quietly and looking to sell their technology and maybe their talent.
So I think actually, not to be only negative, there's also positive things about where the InsurTech industry could potentially go. Because if you look at the fundamental infrastructure for the InsurTechs versus the incumbents, it's very different, right? And I think a lot of the incumbents are trying to figure out, oh, how do we become more data driven, right? You hear this all the time at every InsurTech conference that we talk about. Who can actually do it? Who can go and take that new technology and pull API data into their stack, in a few days, right? It's actually the InsurTechs, right? And eventually those InsurTechs are going to get bigger and bigger and more mature, right? They're going to grow up. People are always talking about like, oh, the InsurTechs are going to take over, or the tech companies are going to take over. They don't want to be insurance comps, by the way. Like tech companies have a much better comps compared to insurance. So I don't think they actually want to become an insurance company. But as these InsurTech companies mature, I actually think it opens up a lot more opportunities because there's now new products that can be built because of the tech-driven infrastructure and platform. Right. And so I think the market actually ends up getting a lot bigger rather than, we're trying to steal market share. Some of that will happen. But there's also so many new products that are being built. And that I think, when I think of insurance, I think it's just such a dry topic. Maybe you and I are sitting here talking about insurance all day long, but the average person isn't thinking about, oh, I'm going to go sit down and review like 10 policies and see which ones is the best. Right. Most people just want to live life. Humans want to live life. We want to take care of our families, want to take care of our business. We want to make sure things are okay when things are not okay, right? And so part of us as industry experts or key people in this industry is figure out, how do we better serve and take care of people? How do we better serve and take care of businesses? A lot of times, you go and say, oh, look, we don't want to underwrite this. The risk is bad, but that doesn't solve the problem. We can build a healthy insurance portfolio, but that flood is going to still hit those homes and hurt that community, right? And so what are the things that us as insurance professional can add more value and say, hey, look, maybe we can't issue a policy, but what are some things that we can help support some way to get that community to be more proactive, into, like, maybe don't build a house there, or if you can't move, what are you going to do? Put some sandbags or something, like whatever it is, right? But those things can be coming from the insurance companies as added value versus, cherry picking like just a good risk.
Okay, and with this almost positive note, we should finish with something.
So I think there's maybe two. One, if you're lost, it's important to deeply listen to yourself. You will get the guidance that you need to make the decisions for what you need to do. The second one is, I really encourage all entrepreneurs and InsurTech professionals to build things that really make a big impact. You don't win by playing small. So make sure whatever the problem you're solving is big enough, so you're helping to transform our world.
Tiffany, thank you very, very, very much for joining me today. I think this will be episode 100 or 100 and something, but no matter what, it's spectacular that you're opening this season, whatever that may be. Thank you. It was a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much. It was great to catch up, and I'll see you soon.